Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope everyone had a creepy yet safe Halloween. Tonight I've got some encounters that I really want to share with you. Before we get into these encounters, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help this channel to continue to grow and go. All of those links are in the description below. I also have a second channel for creepypasta, fanfiction, and scary voice acting. Stories that, well, they just don't fit on this channel. Now, if that's anything that you're into, follow that link and give those stories a listen. You may just like what you hear. Now, I've definitely taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Briefly before tonight's encounters, last night I had a 3-hour conversation with Coonbo Baker. For those who are not familiar with him, he is a cryptid researcher. He started researching 40 plus years ago. He worked for NASA and some other organizations that I don't feel like I have the right to share those organizations. He can and probably will. Maybe not, I don't know. But 3 hours of he and I just talking, and, well, I mainly listened because 40 plus years of research. Now, I'm not talking book research. I'm talking this man was in the field, deep in the field. And by the end of that phone call, I felt like I gained the equal amount of knowledge that I had prior going into the conversation. He is extremely intelligent and filled with encounters. I mean, this gentleman could be his own book probably 10 times over. So during this conversation, he shared quite a bit of encounters with me and quite a bit of information about these cryptids, and opened my eyes to things that I kind of disagreed with before talking to him. And, so Tuesday, I am going to be interviewing him, and possibly for the next couple of days after. Just a truly amazing vault of information. I have no other words to describe him. So, tomorrow night, I will be interviewing the person who lives in Fort Pierce, Florida, who did a Facebook live stream video and captured a Dogman. Now, I know that there has been a lot of speculation in regards to that sighting, but you cannot fake a Facebook live stream. I mean, there is no CGI, there is nothing during it. So I'm looking forward to interviewing him. That'll be tomorrow. So I've got quite a good array of stuff to start November off with. Tonight we're going to get into some encounters as well. Tonight's first encounter, Otaka, Oklahoma, June 1st, 1992. A friend and I were standing alongside of a country road. My friend's cousin, who was with us, had walked up the street to a friend's house to get him to come join us. We also had several dogs with us in the road. I remember one or two of those dogs being hunting or tracking dogs. As my friend and I waited in the road, we started to get the feeling like we were being watched. We noticed a melon patch from across the road. We both remarked that it was kind of spooky looking. And I made a bet for him to walk across the road and go into the patch by himself. He laughed and said, "Forget that." As we stood there, I noticed something that seemed to be standing behind a large tree that was by the melon field. I thought it looked like a man as it was standing up erect. I pointed to it so my friend could see it as well. The dogs we had with us were going absolutely crazy at this point. They were barking and running around in the road. Just then I heard probably the scariest sound I had ever heard in my entire life. The sound came from the melon field and was enough to make my skin crawl. The sound was a very deep growl, very similar to a bear growl, only deeper and more focused. I mean that it was a constant, low-pitch, yet resonating growl. It seemed to be a warning growl for us to stay away. As I looked at my friend, we both had the look of total fear on our faces. We took off as fast as we could. We totally forgot about my friend's cousin, who seemed confused when he finally caught up with us. After we told him what we saw and heard, he knew what we were talking about, since he lived there and was familiar with the stories. We were too scared to walk all the way back to his house, so we stopped off at one of their uncle's houses and they took us home by a car. He recounted his stories to us. He believed in this thing as well. After the event, we could hear strange sounds coming from the woods for quite a while. They sounded like whistling and howling. After a bit, they died off, and we finally got some sleep at about 5 or 6 in the morning. Tonight's second encounter, Red River, Texas, November 1987. I was deer hunting with friends on a place known in the area as Bower Slash. A slash where I come from is a swampy area. We had to cross the Four Deuce Ranch to get to our hunting lease. The ranch was owned by Sally Gooding at the time. I don't know if she still owns it now. It's been 11 years since this happened. We had to cross a creek in a boat to get to the deer lease. This lease was surrounded by 2 creeks. These creeks ranged from 12 to 24 feet wide and had been dug out by beavers, which made them 7 foot deep and deeper in places. You will understand why I'm giving you all this info in a few minutes. There were 3 of us hunting in this area. It's way off the beaten path. My friends went in one direction and I went the other. I had never been there before, so I spent most of the morning slowly making my way through the woods and trying to keep my bearings about which direction I was going. We had gotten into the woods before daylight, and there was only a light breeze blowing. I was trying to keep it in my face. I had seen a couple of doe after the sun came up, and I could hear several dogs running on the opposite side from where we came in. The Weyerhausers owned a few hundred acres on one side of us, and the Four Deuce Ranch was on the other side. We're pretty secluded. I was making my way along the creek in the direction that I should have found one of my friends. I was moving very slow, still looking and hunting as I went, and still had the wind in my face. Before I tell you more, I want you to understand. I grew up and have always lived out in the country. I have played in the woods from daylight till dark, and I have never been scared like I was on this day. As I came up on a big blown down with a lot of undergrowth around it, I could see something moving underneath the brush pile. I heard the limbs moving and the twigs popping first. I thought it might have been one of my friends, making him a blind to hunt out of. I whistled like a quail twice to get his attention so that I wouldn't startle him. I was probably 30-35 feet away, and the brush and undergrowth in the slash was pretty thick. After I whistled, the movement stopped, and I could see a large, dark-colored figure moving toward the creek at an angle away from me. My hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had that feeling that I never felt before. This had never happened to me before while I was hunting. I was still thinking to myself, it may be somebody, but I still took my .30-06 off of safety and walked toward whatever it was. I lost sight of it in the underbrush and then picked it up again on the other side of the creek. The creek in this area is about 12 or 14 feet wide. I never heard any sound of anything hitting the water. I ran up to the edge of the water, and about 100 feet on the other side, I could barely see a black figure with a silver-looking tint to its hair. Where it was standing and the sun was shining on it, I only saw it for 30 to 40 seconds this last time. Whatever it was walked on two legs and was 6 feet or taller, and moved through the woods quieter than anything I had ever seen. After it was on the other side of the creek, it never made any noise. The ground was covered with oak leaves that were damp and a lot of undergrowth, so I didn't see any footprints. I walked back down to the blowdown where I originally saw it and found where a large log had been moved. This log was probably 3 feet tall, maybe 20 feet long. Although it was decaying, it was too heavy for anyone I knew to move it. I figured I had interrupted a mid-morning snack, and then I questioned my own good judgment about going toward it when I saw it. I get chills just writing this. I decided it was time for me to head back to the pickup. I was one of the longest walks I had ever made. I had to go through some thick stands of switch cane. My heart was in my throat, and I left my gun off safety all the way back to the truck. That's something I have never done before. I pride myself in being safe with firearms, and have been hunting since I was 6 years old. I told my friends what I had seen, but they just made light of it. They said it might have been a bear. I'm familiar with all types of wildlife, and I knew it was not a bear. It was something I had never seen before or since. Today's third encounter, Red River, Texas, 1982, April. My cousin and I were playing outside. It was just getting dark. We were told to find my uncle. He was working out in a pasture that was cleared for the cattle. We jumped the fence to go find him. My cousin said, "Oh, there he is." So we started toward him. We were about 50 feet from him when we realized this was not my uncle. It was a hairy creature about 6.5 feet tall. It turned around to look at us, grunted, and then ran toward the woods. It stepped over a fence and disappeared. We screamed and turned and ran. My uncle heard our scream and came out of a nearby barn. He thought we had made it up. That was until about 8 months later, December of '83. We had another encounter. It was a Saturday night, and we were going into town to see a movie. Rain and sleet had been falling most of the day. We lived back off the main road and had to travel logging roads to the highway. About 1,000 yards from our driveway, my aunt suddenly screamed. We looked up in time to see it. It was crossing the road right in front of us. It jumped across the ditch on the other side of the road and disappeared into the woods. In the headlights, the color of this animal was bare brown. He had covered in total hair. The hair was not very long, though. There was missing patches of hair on its arms and legs. Again, he seemed about 6.5 feet tall, kind of sloped in the back. We heard no sounds as he crossed. Today's fourth encounter, Red River, Texas, November 2002. I was walking east on the North Creek bank at sunrise. After going about a quarter of a mile, I heard someone walking through the woods on the south side of the creek. The sun was just coming up, and the other hunter was outlined by the morning light. Not wanting to be mistaken for a deer, I hollered out that I was down in the bottom. I got no response, so I hollered again. That's when this big old sucker stepped out of the woods onto the high creek bank and hollered back at me, so loud I froze in my tracks. I couldn't move. It was over 8 feet tall, reddish-brown in color. Its arms were very long, down to its knees. The shoulders were wide, like 4 feet across, and had a small waist. This critter was built like a weightlifter. It hollered one more time and shook a cedar tree like it was going to rip it out of the ground. Then it turned and headed south back into the woods. I waited for a good long while and then ran back to my truck. Today's fifth encounter, Hopkins County, Texas, fall of '99. I was checking out this area in North Hopkins County where I've hunted in the past. I was in a vehicle returning from the woods. I was pre-hunting an area, so therefore I had no gun with me. It was out of season. I wasn't sure if it was still available to hunt. I noticed 3 ape-like creatures out in the field together. I stopped my vehicle and looked at them through binoculars and noticed a large male with genitalia. I could make out his chest muscles like a gorilla. Its head was shaped like that of a gorilla. Large legs, but I couldn't tell how tall it was, except much taller than myself. Its hair was darkish brown. The second one was sitting down Indian style, back towards me, but was darker. I believe it was a female. The third appeared to be maybe a juvenile standing up playing with a large stick in its hand. It was more like a monkey that could stand upright. I watched them from a good distance for more than 15 minutes. Finally, I felt a complete awe. I was kind of shocked and told my family that I'd seen some ape-like creatures in the woods. I couldn't believe that I had seen them, especially out in the open. I haven't visited that area since, but would be happy to show where they had been spotted. I have seen and heard other signs, but did not put it all together as being Bigfoot evidence. Today's sixth encounter, Delta, Texas, 1996. This was late morning, probably 11:25. I was hunting a thicket facing east. The area I was hunting runs north to south. I was at the far west side, sitting on a fence line. There were 175-200 grazing cattle behind me. A few calves spooked as I walked up the fence line to the split at the base of the willow tree that I sat at most of the time. But the cattle are used to seeing me there. A few seconds pass, and they kept grazing. I sat there all morning, waiting on a deer or my brother to show up. As usual, he was late, so I was eating the cookies I packed for him. All of a sudden, the cattle behind me and the other part of the herd across the other side of the pasture started stampeding to the center of the pasture. The cattle met in the center of the pasture and continued to thunder-like stamp southward. I knew it was not me that had startled them. As I slowly turned and looked over my left shoulder, I saw something walking on the far west fence line, heading northward. It stopped twice and looked in my direction. An ice-cold feeling shot down my legs. The 6-strand barbed wire fence came to his thigh or butt area. This thing was 8.5-9 feet tall, solid black, and covered ground in a way that I had never seen. I thought if this was a man, he would be a good jumper. But it didn't look like it was in any hurry, just moving on. I was so caught off guard that I didn't think to lift my rifle to get a better look. All I could do was just stare with my mouth wide open. My brother showed up about 30 minutes later, and I asked him, "How did you do that?" He said he had just parked his truck and started walking northward where I knew you would be, 1.5 miles north of where I lived. So that eliminated him. All right, guys, there you have it. 6 pretty interesting encounters. Like I said last night, the conversation with Kuhnbo was truly amazing. The guy has been researching for 40-something years and has countless amounts of encounters to share. And just having him agree to come on the show is truly a blessing and an honor. So I hope you guys tune in on Tuesday to check it out. Hopefully I can have him on a couple more times. Just a really, really down-to-earth, very intelligent individual. And, he was telling me stuff about encounters with Dogman and Sasquatch meeting up. He was talking about different Sasquatches. Now I've really never been a fan of the variant, the breakdown of Sasquatch and Dogman. But the way he explained it to me last night, it really opened my eyes to things. And, it was a very, very enlightening conversation. And, I really cannot wait for this interview. And, I know you guys are going to truly love it because just like me, you guys want the truth and you don't mind a good story, do you? Nor do I. So I'm looking forward to it too. All right, guys, I'll see you guys tomorrow. And with that, farewell.